Stay happy for us. Yeah, we've got one. Just look at it. Yeah. Right, we'll crack on, I think. Cheers, folks, for making it down on a bleak day. Let's see, hopefully that rain will hold off. There's a contingency plan if it does start to chuck it down. Let's get the plaid on it and get them indoors. But hopefully it'll hold off. I thought this would be a great opportunity while all these swords are here. They're literally going back to the castle tomorrow to share the history of them with you all, you know, with interested spirits like yourself. And in refurbishing these has been quite a task, a lot of hours, as you can imagine, but it's one of the most interesting parts of doing this kind of work, of reproducing and making and studying the original arms. It is studying the originals closely, and when you get the chance to study a lot, you know, there's 24 swords here, and compare and contrast and identify elements in the blades and the hilts and the construction and so on, and it's even more fascinating. You hit on other little discoveries and connections overall. So this was simply the idea today, was to share something of this work and the history with you. And there's been certainly one major legend reunited with a sword from this project that's been really quite exciting to find. So we'll leave that till last because it's a gem. But I'll run you through, not literally, but I'll run you through more or less the collection from what we have here. Like I say, this is very sort of chilled presentation, so feel free at any point, you know, to ask any questions you have about anything as we go along. Okay. Now these swords are all, as you know, part of the collection from Inveraray Castle. Inveraray Castle, obviously owned by the Duke of Argyll, chief of the clan Campbells. Now the Campbells, through the Jacobite period, were in the pay of the government under Cumberland's command when it came to the forces, and the Duke of Argyll at that time was leading the Argyll militia, Argyll and Bute militia. They still have the original flag at the castle. I think it's going to the National Museum that was at Culloden, and it's a massive big square flag with the arms of the regiment on it. So I mean, they've got some incredible pieces of Scottish history there at that castle, and really it's probably one of the best provenanced collections in Scotland, because we know where all the arms have come from, and there's reference in history to a lot of the arms recovered from Jacobites and so on being taken to Inveraray Castle, and in fact they've simply been there since that time, since the 45. Some of them have been family pieces from previous dukes that have been used in later campaigns through the 19th century as well. So it really is, it's one of the best provenanced historical collections in Scotland that we know of. So I'll simply start at one end. Now, if you do want the chance to handle these swords, there are gloves, and I would ask that no sword be handled without them. Also, try and handle the blade as little as possible if you're passing a sword from one person to another. With your hands around the hilt as much as possible. They have all been refurbished, they have all been waxed, so you know, overall they shouldn't be taking any damage or such anyway. But if you do want to handle any of the swords, please feel free to just glove up.
Are these okay, or do you want proper?
Use them for cycling?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll use these.
Yeah, okay.
Sweat through.
Yeah. One.
Okay, so this, no, I'll start it. So we've not got 20 swords swinging about. There's a couple here at the start. These are regimental basket hilts, but much later than the Jacobite period. This is what we call 1828 pattern. Okay, obviously from the 18th century onwards, the government started to standardise a lot of the patterns of weapons, the swords especially, and we really start to see some of the first regimental patterns appear. We start to see them really about the 1760s at the earliest, and there are then defined regimental patterns from about 1788 onwards. And so this is one of the later styles, 1828. It's derived from the 45 style broadswords, slightly different in some ways, but more or less it's the same tool for the same job. You know, the blade width, very typical of Jacobite pieces, double edged with simple single V fuller that's quite easy to make in a way for any government piece. Certainly the same today in the army. If they can make it quick and lots of them and cheap, then they're interested. So mass produced in a way. The basket hilts, at this time we're looking at having them more or less stamped out of most of it in the one piece, and then a few other pieces welded up after that. So it makes it quick and easy to mass produce in a way. The pattern of basket itself still has some of the decorative elements that you find in the Jacobite pieces, hearts and circles and quatrefoils. Hearts and circles and concentric circles are decorative elements that you find in Highland metalwork from the 17th, 18th century certainly, and you even find elements like this, the concentric circles especially, going back to a couple of ring marks, so going right back to Pictish period at least. So let's say this is a functional weapon, a serviceable weapon, mass produced in a way with elements of the Jacobite swords, but if you chance to wield some of the Jacobite swords, you'll see what a swordsman's sword really is all about.
Paul, I've all got this bit here.
Yeah.
Does that serve a function?
Yep, it does serve a function, and it's not to trap a blade, it's not to break a blade, it's nothing like that. That's a bit of a one of the 101 sword myths that we have, right? It's not a blade trap. You try trapping and twisting someone's blade in there at speed, it's just, you're not going to even get the chance at the moment it takes a blade to flash down there, and they're not going to hold their arm out and wait for you to twist it out their hand. It doesn't work, it's not practical, it's not what it's for. Simply the spacing here between the, this is sometimes called a saltire panel because of the shape, and that gap there on either side, when you hold the sword, the forward knuckle of your thumb and the forward knuckle of your index finger is more exposed. So basically if you didn't have these, yeah, a crack coming down here could crack you in the knuckle, simple as that. So it's simply a forward guard that is going to meet this guard. A blade will meet this guard before it will meet your knuckle. That's it. It's very simple.
Any rumours about charge action and using them to get around charges is not really...
Well, that's a new one, I've not heard that.
The guys in Glasgow were talking about that.
What, using it to scoop a target the way?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Right, these are now targe spoons. I've never heard that one, that's brilliant. No, that's wonderful. No? That's like the boy at Bannockburn festival I had last year, and somebody came up and said, oh, is it true, the long swords, that they had the, what was it? They had the quillions sharp at the end, so that when you got in close you could go whoosh, to somebody's face. It's like, mate, if you're in that close, you just ram a pommel through his face and do a bit more damage, you know. I said, no, not true, it's another good myth though. So it's the same, another 1828 pattern, it's just slightly different proportion of basket, it's slightly smaller. I think it's quite a slightly nicer proportion basket, but essentially it's the same weapon. So it's probably just from a different maker that have just made it. Same pattern, but just slightly different size basket, that's all. So really pretty much the same. This is another 1828 pattern, but it's got a slightly earlier look to it. In the fuller here you've got For My King and Country, so clearly a government piece, no question. But this has been a custom piece. This is custom engraving, it was not standard, and you've got a very custom grip here. I'm actually not sure if if anyone can identify this material, would be interested as to whether it is ivory. I'm not sure whether it is just
Walrus?
Could be walrus. I've even thought, you know, it could be mammoth ivory. It's got similar look and feel to mammoth ivory, to be honest.
It's missing its tang button.
It's missing the pommel and
Is that-
the tang button. Yeah.
Is that spiral natural? Because if it was, it'd be an apple.
Marble, possibly even, right? Possibly. But if anyone can identify that material, I'll be interested. You know, close look.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Oh, no, it's
Definitely a piece that's
it's
been,
definitely carved eye. It's not a natural spiral.
it's definitely a piece that's been customised, and this was something that was quite usual. I mean, it still goes on today. Military personnel, certainly in certain units, get to carry pretty much whatever knife they want, and quite often they will ask for that to be personalised, customised with their regimental badge or name or number or something. So historically it's something you see with swords and blades. This is an earlier pattern of basket hilt, this brass basket. They're nicely made, they're quite bling, they're quite nice. You find these with a variety of different blade styles on them. Broadsword blade here with Solingen. A lot of German blades from Solingen, from Passau, were imported to Britain and used for British regimental swords, but a lot of the majority of Jacobite blades, in fact, you'll find are German. The German bladesmiths made through history some of the best quality swords and blades, and it was German engineering. They were good at it. In fact, there were a couple of blade making centres in the UK, one at Hounslow Heath, where it was staffed by German sword smiths, and also at Shotley Bridge in Northumberland. Now there was a move in the late 17th century to basically import German bladesmiths and blade grinders and makers to make the finest blades, and they were all literally families of them, dozens of them moved over to Shotley Bridge to start the mills there and to start production at Shotley Bridge. So there were a lot of German smiths actually living and working in the UK through history as well. So this is a Solingen one. It's again a serviceable weight, fairly short blade, but it's fairly broad, and yeah, there's a bit of thickness in that as well. If you're not already aware, the knack of a good blade, any good sword blade, and you'll find it on any original without question, is distal taper. And that is the taper not of the width but of the thickness. And you'll generally start with about 5mm, 6mm thick here and get progressively thinner and thinner and thinner towards the point. This has got something of a distal taper but not too much, so it's still got a bit of meat to it, still got a bit of heft to it. For any cutting blade you need mass. You need cutting mass in the blades, so it can't be too light. And even though this is a short blade, it certainly would lop something off.
It seemed quite flexible. You were just in handling it.
Yeah. These blades are, you know,
Are these blades
they wouldn't have
contemporary
lost
with their hilts?
any temper.
Are they contemporary with the hilts, these blades?
Yeah. Some are earlier. That could be an earlier blade, to be honest.
Just put it down there.
It says Solingen. You find different spellings, but that's Solingen basically. Solingen in Germany it was like Germany's Sheffield. It was a steel production centre, and it was where a lot of the sword makers were based. A lot of the sword making mills were based, and there was mass production going on in Solingen.
And is the running wolf, is that the Solingen mark? Yeah.
Running wolf was originally a mark. It was granted in the 14th century to makers in Passau,
Right.
in Germany, which I should maybe Prussia at the time. And so it was identified with Passau. It's also known there was a northern Italian maker who used that and moved to Solingen, so it was adopted by Solingen makers in the 17th century as well. But you find the running wolf mark. There were even some English makers started adopting use of it as well. So we're getting on to some of the older pieces and more interesting pieces here. This is an interesting old piece that it's either Jacobite or it's Jacobite with a government blade. And the only reason I say that is this tiny little marking down here. It's got a nice bit of scroll work here, but there's one wee mark here that I've also identified on a lot of the blades that went into making up the Twickenham fence after Culloden. I'll explain what the Twickenham fence is later on, because I made an interesting wee discovery about that on one of recent visits. But this mark was found on a lot of government blades that went into the fence. But the hilt is very much a Jacobite style, very typical. They look quite small, but in fact they're only made for the hand. Your hand will fit perfectly comfortably in there, unless you're particularly large of the hand, but they're simply made around the hand. And what you find in originals is you find elements that you don't generally find on mass-produced modern pieces. Some of these will be the canting of the hilt. The guard of the hilt is not sitting at right angles to the blade here. It sits at an angle back here. Yeah, that's because when you hold your hand out like this, the back of your hand does not sit at right angles to the deck, or horizontal to the deck. It does sit back, and so it's made to sit back here in the hand. Also, these bars here, on mass-produced pieces, they'll just be flat, but they curve up here. And the reason they curve up, when the hand goes in there, there's your thumb, there's your index finger, which in a grip sit above the centre of your grip, the centre of your hand. And so they curve around the thumb and the index to naturally fit the hand. In fact, the pommel should be just in contact with the back of the hand here as well, because then you have a connection at either end of the hand for instant movement, for any movement of your palm, your hand, which is where your sword, all the sword movement's based on. So there should be connection here, and there should be just connection up here as well, and that allows you instantaneous movement of the blade transferred from your hand. So in fact they're not too small at all. They weren't tiny wee folk back then. This history often perpetuates. They were often much the same size as you and me, and a lot of them taller as well.
What's the grip made of? Was it race skin or shark skin or something?
Quite often shark.
Shark.
A lot of the grips here, I've seen shark skin.
Would they be commonly lined with something? A series of those?
Sometimes, yeah.
Just the lines disintegrated over time.
Aye, sometimes on some of these you'll see evidence of wee bits of material or wee bits of leather between the bottom of the grip and the guard. And often you would find either just like a small circle of leather around the base, sometimes coming up to about half the hilt, and sometimes really fully enclosing inside the hilt. And that was just, wee bit of knuckle protection. But to be honest, if you're looking at, ruining somebody's day properly, and if you come off with a wee scrape or two on your knuckles, it's a small price to pay. So quite often you find them without, In fact, there's a couple of pieces of red coat material which you're kicking about in a couple of these. This is a brass basket, and you find examples of brass basket through 1745 campaign. This I would say more a government pattern of hilt. Again, nice blade. It's burns here, it seems to say, or something similar to that. In the blade, but a nice, I would say fairly light, fast sword overall, with a nice wire grip. Some of them retain everything on the original grip, and wire grips you're more likely to find intact than leather grips. Some leather grips, obviously, if it's organic, it's the first thing to disintegrate and go. But this has got its original wire grip, twisted wire, brass wire, with X heads either side. So, a nice piece.
So what about practicality of like brass hilt versus like steel hilt? Would be like more for decoration, and then practical wise, would that not be weaker than steel?
It wouldn't be for decoration, it would be for practicality of producing, mass producing.
So for the price, so you would...
With brass you can basically cast an open plan and form it after. A bit easier. It's a fairly easy method to make a basket. Steel, obviously, it's a harder material. It's a bit harder to work. So it was just an option in manufacturing. That was all.
Yeah. So again, like purely of the strength, you'd probably find that weaker, or like the brass basket easier to damage.
Well, obviously, brass is a bit softer than steel. So generally, brass baskets you find a wee bit thicker for that reason, just to give it a wee bit more bulk, a wee bit more strength. but I've seen brass baskets that have taken a lot of use and stood up to a lot of use.
But that would change the balance of the weapon itself if the basket was heavier.
It can do, yes, it can do, because obviously a bit more mass going on in the hilt. But to be honest, the baskets were never, the hand was targeted, but the hand was targeted more when you've got the time to do that in single combat. In battlefield, you're less likely to see that. It's going to be very quick closure going on. So it wouldn't have been as much a concern to know that your basket might crack here or there. In fact, I've seen more damage to steel baskets than brass baskets.
Because they're harder.
Exactly, they're harder, more likely to crack. Yeah.
One thing I see
which one did that come off?
This one.
This
Can
one
you
here.
slide that inside the hilt and keep it with it, please?
One thing I see about this blade, Paul, is it's got nicks on both sides. But they swap the guard round, so they've got even wear.
Yeah, just take the blade out, turn it round, you get twice the length out of the blade. That's one of the advantages to having a double-edged blade, is you get twice the life out of it. There are actions where you would use the back edge for defence with a closed fist grip.
You're not going to not just there.
Possibly it could be from that, but when you see them down here, it's more likely. It's just
You know,
turn it around. So this is another brass basket. Let's see, you'll see this is a wee bit thicker, and this is what you see as a horseman's basket as well with the loop here. Now, this one I could completely strip because the pommel here is slotted for stripping. So when this came apart, we could see inside the tang that it was an interesting construction. The tang only went up into the grip for about this much, for about an inch, and then the tang itself was basically split and sandwiched over that and pinned through with a couple of pins. Now, I've read accounts of Wilkinson's sword using that method in the 19th century for certain sabres and swords. I've never actually seen it before, but this is an example of it. Now, this sword's seen a lot of use. It's got a lot of, plenty of marks of use down it, and I've no reason to, think they've been put there later or something. They all indicate edge use in combat, and the blade's perfectly fine, so it's clearly stood up to it. But it's, a bit of a chopper of a backsword. It's weighty, but still balanced.
What period, Paul, would that be, that one?
I would say it's contemporary with the 45. Probably 1740s, I would say on that.
It's very broad for a backsword.
Did they use those with an augmented cutting action, similar to the way Oriental?
No, it wouldn't.
Only one hand.
It wouldn't help the cut so much. You get a swifter cut from just using a single hand, letting the speed of the blade work. Yeah.
With the Oriental swords with Japanese,
Yeah.
when they come into close quarters,
Right.
push and
Right. Yep.
drive it through.
Sure.
Particularly aiming at tucking it up under armour, under a helmet.
Target. Yeah.
There's many techniques.
This is a big basket, and this is where you start to see a bit of interesting variation, because all the Jacobite pieces were pretty much individually made. This is for a large hand. The blade on it, you see Andrea Ferrara. You'll see Andrea Ferrara on a lot of these blades. Andrea Ferrara was a 16th century Italian smith. He was from Belluno, which was in the far north of Italy near the Austrian border. It was fought over a lot because Belluno was the centre of the finest quality iron ore in Europe. It was regarded as in. So there was a lot of smiths and mills making from Belluno and making what was regarded as some of the finest blades in Europe. Now, Andrea Ferrara and his brother had a forge there, and Andrea Ferrara died about 1600, but his legend carried on well after his life. These are blades that were more produced in the 17th century and the 18th century, and they still have Andrea Ferrara. Now, unless he was a mortal, maybe truth to that movie yet. It's unlikely, but it's certainly, basically, his name was carried on as a sign of quality, a mark of quality.
Could there have been earlier blades that were remounted?
Some of them could, we don't know. Right now, we can't really distinguish original Ferrara blades from later blades we can in some way. This has the four crown's heads of Peter Wundus the Younger, so we know exactly when this blade was made, within about 30 years anyway. And so this was a mid to late 17th century blade. So some from other markings around it you can, but to be honest, there's not been enough research enough to determine original Ferrara blades. So this is a Ferrara blade, and like I say, these four crowned king heads indicate it was made by Peter Wundus the Younger, and it's excellent blade, excellent temper. Really, for a blade this long, and you'll see what I mean by distal taper, this goes remarkably thin here. You're probably looking about 0.8, 0.9 of a millimetre thick at the tip. Remarkable, fantastic blade. Now in contrast, this is a bit of a beast. Now this is a lovely hilt. It's a beautiful little, what you call Glasgow pattern hilt. But the blade, this is a bit of a curiosity. This is muckle.
Single-edged?
Single-edged, aye. And it's probably getting on for a quarter-inch down here. Now this is hefty, and this is a heavy blade. A short blade, there's a lot of steel going on here. When I first saw this and I first picked it up, straight away my thoughts were Victorian. So quite often, it's quite usual for Victorian smiths and makers to make or remake historical swords. There was a Gothic revival, there was an interest in reviving medieval history and Jacobite history in the 19th century and making shiny pieces for stately homes and castle walls. It was quite often done, and quite often these repros can be quite well made, but quite often again, as soon as you pick them up, you realise there's something wrong with this, and you look closer and yeah, it's a later piece. You can tell something by the patina sometimes on blades as well. But looking even closer at this, to be honest, my jury's still out, because it's a well-tempered blade. It's remarkably thin down here actually, so it's well made. To take a blade this thin, getting down to a millimetre or less, and having a decent temper on it, that's where the real skill lies in bladesmithing.
Is that a back saw?
It's a back sword, aye. The markings on it as well, the Andrea Ferrara that's faded as you see over time with use and with cleaning and so on. You know, it's just possible it could be an unusual original.
An Italian sword that's been re-hilted perhaps?
A lot of the swords you see were re-hilted because broken blades were actually quite common. I mean, with life or death, hefty use, blades break. It was quite common. So remounting a sword, that was usual. I mean, this is definitely not. You can tell from the marks in the hilt. Definitely not the original blade to the hilt. But whether it's an original blade or not, you tell me.
What kind of damage do you think is on the blade? Those little pieces.
It's certainly, again, there's some nicks there that would generally indicate use. Seems edge to edge use. It's possible. It's either a very well made Victorian repro of a blade, or I could tell some stories.
Interesting.
Yeah, some of them raise more questions than tell you answers.